And tonight, the work that really inspires this evening was created in response to the Rodney King incident in the 90s with the phrase random kindness and senseless acts of beauty. My partner and I are the original authors of that phrase, and Herbert, with images created by Mayumi Oda, which were actually inspired by a 12th century scroll called the Chojujiga. I'll put that in the chat for you, that reference, which is a 12th century scroll created at a time when people were intentionally kept illiterate and were able to organize themselves through this language of picture animals. And so this is a very early example of art being used radically to take back power in a difficult moment in history in Japan. And we wanted to take this phrase back to its radical roots when we did our 20th anniversary edition. And we were honored by Desmond Tutu, with whom we first began working in the late 70s and 80s on the anti-apartheid divestment campaign when I was a graduate student at Harvard. And we've stayed in touch and have been inspired and guided by Archbishop Tutu's work, not only as a anti-apartheid national and global leader, substituting the path of retribution for one of forgiveness, and the truth and reconciliation process that he set up, both in South Africa, but has continued internationally in many places. So we feel very indebted to Desmond Tutu, and we would like to offer a quote from his work. And I'm wondering if there's something more that you'd like to share, Brandon, about the history of the context for this award. Thank you, Brandon. Is there something you would like to share yourself about this before we move on? You're on mute, Brandon.
So the Random Kindness Community Resilience Leadership Award really is there to help award people who have contributed a lot to community development, especially from an environmental perspective. And it is inspired by the work of Desmond Tutu. And I've read the book, and it's an incredible read. And this is my second award ceremony that I'm co-hosting with Dr. Pavel and Carl Anthony. And the first was for NAACP Environmental Program Manager Jacqui Patterson last month. And so I really appreciate the opportunity to be here and learn as a next generation climate leader about the people who are, trailblazing and creating a new kind of movement that's, unconventional and outside of the norm for what people consider, green activism. And getting to meet people like Cara Judea Alhadeff is incredible. And I'm so sad that this is my last week. I wish I could stay, and I'll definitely be coming back for the next leadership award. It's probably one of my favorite moments from this internship this summer.
Thank you, Brendan. And Carl, is there anything that you would like to say about the inspiration of Archbishop Tutu in our lives?
Well, I'd like to say that he's been an inspiration to many people all over the world, but in particular, he also has been an inspiration to African American communities for his leadership of the South African transformation of power from the apartheid period to the present period. And he did that in a way that also encouraged us to really think about the potential outcome, that transformation happened without violence. And we now are facing a period in the United States where we're trying to find a new path of transformation over the racial divides that separate us. And we need to realize that these patterns of separation and violence have gone through many communities, and also Cara's work also exemplifies the idea of a peaceful transformation of across racial divides. And we're really pleased to accept her award, give her award with this kind of recognition of Desmond Tutu.
Thank you. And we'll end our evening with a quote and an invocation by Archbishop Tutu, and who was the first recipient of this award. And it's my great pleasure to proceed in welcoming and introducing Dr. Cara Judea Alhadeff. She is a scholar, an activist, an artist, and a mother whose work engages feminist embodied theory and has been a subject of many documentaries. She's also an author of significant books, including Zazu Dreams, Between the Scarab and the Dung Beetle, a cautionary fable for the Anthropocene era. This book is gorgeous. We'll be sharing some images from it with you throughout the evening. And what I love about Cara, she embodies, she takes a very bold, courageous, and embodied stance towards everything that she has researched and written about. There are many people who are cutting edge writers and researchers, but not only has she been a professor at UC Santa Cruz, not only has she been an educator and an executive with program director with Jews of the Earth, but she really takes these messages to the most embodied and radical edge that she has available to her in her own life and in her work. She is not only a writer, but also a photographer, a performance artist. And her work has been recognized not only in the United States, but in many parts of the world, in Berlin, in Austria. And she is someone who is living in this, when we find our root suffering coming from the sense of fragmentation within ourselves and with each other and with the larger Earth community. She is someone who is embodying how that reintegration, synthesis, and infusion can look in a world that works for all. Her commitment to social justice and racial justice is impeccable. And she's always learning and coming from a place of great humility. And tonight we have the delight to not only anticipate her arrival to the Bay Area in person in her biodiesel bus and home, where she and Rob and Zazu have been part of an ongoing community at the Eco Village in North Carolina, but they're about to land in the Bay Area. So I want to welcome this traveling community, and Cara will be also introducing her partner and son Zazu, who is the superhero of her book. But we'll be seeing the journey. How did these roots get started? Where did she come from? And what are the lessons for all of us? And what's a vision that might work for these times? So without further pause, I would like to invite Dr. Cara Judea Alhadeff forward and ask her to introduce her partner and Zazu to us and take us on the magnificent journey that has led to her being chosen this year as the 2020 Random Kindness Community Resilience Leadership Award recipient. Welcome, Dr. Cara Judea Alhadeff. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Paloma and Carl. I am very, very honored to be here and to be in dialogue with all of you. and I am eager to hear your various perspectives. So much of what I understand about Earth House and breakthrough communities is very much rooted in dialogue, and the fertility of that kind of vulnerability that comes when we are willing to be curious, as Paloma said, which often comes with edges, as you also shared, Paloma, which can be sharp, and I'll explore some of those sharp edges. And for now, I'd like to introduce the two loves of my life who are sitting next to me. My mother is also out there, I see in the virtual world as another. And Rob Myers, who will be in conversation with me. And Rob is a biologist and a wildlife ecologist and furniture maker, woodworker. And my son Zazu, and the book here that Paloma is showing, who represents so much of what I am in the process of learning and what gives me hope, a sense of capacity, I'll say instead of hope, capacity for where we can go every moment of our lives. So thank you, Zazu and Rob, for joining me. And I'm introducing Rob also because we're going to be in conversation. And as I mentioned, in terms of dialogue, this is one way that I feel we can really move through complex issues that are often contradictory and ambiguous through dialogue, through conversation. So that's the way that I'm going to be presenting my acceptance of your quite amazing award. Thank you.
And we also want to honor each of you who are an important member of this community, or you wouldn't be here tonight. And we also want to invite you to place your questions into the chat, as well as your presence and what brings you here tonight. And we'll be weaving together both Cara's presentation with responding to some of your questions. And we'll also allot time at the end of her presentation for opening questions and answer. Thank you.
Okay, so we'll start with a word from Zazu. Can get that, okay. Oh, here we go. We have a little technical challenge. Okay. Okay. And just to confirm, people can see the shared image of Zazu with his dog on the whale. Is that a thumbs up or yes? Thank you. Okay.
Yes, that's great. Wonderful. We're with you.
I understand more and more that there is so much work to be done, that the only way to heal ethnic and racial divisions and the ecology of our global body is to see how we are all interconnected. We all have to take care of each other.
And I'd like to say that I'm starting with Zazu because my work is so deeply inter-trans, multiple. And the necessity, the absolute crucial, beyond necessity of this dialogue in relation to multiple generations is at the core of these discussions. So that's one reason I'm asking Zazu to launch us. Thank you, sweetheart.
So Cara and I have been talking about this for the last few days, and one of the things that I was thinking about with first meeting Cara, the love of my life, was when we met several years ago at Eco Village Ithaca. One reason that I was most intrigued about you was the fact that you really lived your life the way that your ideals and your beliefs every day, and really sometimes painfully in every decision.
Yes.
As well, really more than anybody I've ever known before. So I was thinking of one really grand moment. your 40th birthday and how kind of this way of making decisions and living your life is reflected in the day of your 40th birthday. So if you could tell people about that.
Sure. Let's move on. So that was 9 years ago, and that on my 40th birthday, Zazu was born, and that was both being pregnant with him and the birthing process. And is that image visible to people?
Yeah.
Okay.
Did you want to move to full screen on your image so we can see it?
So both the gestating process and being I had an unassisted home birth right next to the Oakland Federal Building in our apartment, not on the street, but in our apartment, was such a clarifying moment in terms of what all of my work, but theoretically in terms of activism, visually with my photographs and video, had been about up to that point and continues to be, which is this interpenetration of the personal and the political, of the public and the private. Having an unassisted home birth, I was very fortunate in many ways. If I had been in a hospital, I'll just say it could have been disastrous because he had shoulder dystocia, and that, I won't go into details, but in a hospital setting, very negative things take place. I'll say that for now. But having that intimacy of my own body really on the line and understanding it as a greater movement, both in terms of women's bodies across time and across space, was an extraordinarily, as I said, clarifying moment, but also invigorating moment in terms of giving me a sense of, in these moments of extraordinary chaos, whether it's deeply personal and visceral, like giving birth, or global crises that we encounter on a regular basis, and many of us to much, much greater degrees, of course, than others. But how do we maintain our sense of wholeness and intuition in the midst of potentially feeling extraordinarily out of control? And that moment was a stepping stone for me. So I'd like to start there. Yeah. So here's some images of, oh, thank you. Okay, again, technical. This is part of my embodiment, again, with cyborg reality or resistance to cyborg realities. So here I am, I'm actually teaching mom and baby classes. But again, always my body as on that edge that Paloma spoke about. Much of my work, both while I was pregnant and the first several years of Zazu's life, was in relation to the Occupy movement and our reproductive justice movement in Oakland, and the public nursings that we would have, what it meant for our bodies to be visible in a hypersexualized society that is also probably one of the most repressed sexualized or sexual cultures in our history of Homo sapiens. So dealing again with that contradiction. And we'll move on. And also to say that in this practice of decolonizing parenthood and what I call petroleum parenting, my practice is very much about, and just daily life is very much about what my individual, I don't want to say choices because that is obviously very complicated, but the directions that I often force myself to go into through both an act of political commitments, but also an act of beauty and interconnectedness, is always in relation to what I see as a community potential, and also infrastructure. So this idea of individual, community, and infrastructure always being in dialogue, and again, referring to what conversation and difference, that fertility, what that holds for us. And in this context also, Zazu's name in Hebrew, some definition, includes movement, the idea of social movements, the law of impermanence. So again, with Paloma's question to all of you about your names, and just to invite that.
So I think a lot of people probably, you know, when we're hearing about somebody's experiences, their, I think especially for you, when I started hearing about the things that you've worked on, all the projects, you'll talk about a few more of those. But one of the things that I always think is, when did you start that? You know, like, did you come to it as an adult? Were you, you know, so I think maybe giving some background, you know, to when did this start for you?
I think most clearly, again, in my own body, as Zazu's now 9, and actually it was when I was 9 living in Texas, the extraordinary anti-Semitism that I experienced, the violence, both, again, in my body, but also in my understanding of what it means to be different. This is an image that you see, a composite photograph that my mother made, my mother Michaela Amato, who is a visual artist. And this is myself, and I think this is a Velázquez painting. But the image really represents a lot of those ambiguities of what it means to be light-skinned, but also considered violently other, and what that means for my own sense of relationship to the natural world, because those were also times around that 4th grade, third grade, when I began to see the vulnerability of the natural world around me, and how that related to my own childhood vulnerability as being Arab Jewish, Sephardic Jewish. And my family is from the island of Rhodes, but both sides of my family, the island of Rhodes. And so again, these liminal zones, neither this nor that, neti neti, a Sanskrit phrase. And in this neither this nor that, how do we continue to ask questions? How do we maintain that sense of curiosity and that sense of vitality in the midst of this repressive categorizing and binary silencing that obviously in 2020 with COVID-19 we're experiencing in a tremendous way. And obviously multiple manifestations of that. But my family being from a small island in Rhodes, I think really has informed me that ancestral memory.
Cara, we're seeing half of your image on the screen. I think
okay.
Full screen mode at the bottom of your screen.
Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, it's hard for me to know exactly what's
going to move to full screen, and you'll lose the images at the side, but you'll be able to see the beauty of your photography. If you don't mind going back an image so that we can see.
Sure. Maybe can this be closed? Let's see. We may or may not be able to figure it out. As we're doing this, is anyone from who's out there, would anyone like to share their—
There we go. We got it.
Thank you.
That was
because it's now. Okay. So I'll continue. So this is again my family from Rhodes, or one side of my family from Rhodes, with my grandfather and aunts and uncles, and my great-great-grandfather. And here's my grandfather in Spanish Harlem. He owned a botanica. He was the local curandero, the local witch doctor, for many years, and people would come to him with both psychological and physical ailments. So I think this idea, again, of our human body in relation to the earth body, our like Steiner speaks about hard thinking, is very much a part of both my images and written work and performative. Okay.
So, how early did you start, kind of your political actions? And then how did that lead towards your photographic work? That later, with your photographic work of the body and then sex activism
I'm in.
as well.
Yes. Okay.
I finally got in.
So actually, I need to see.
We're going to ask everyone who is not part of the presentation to please mute.
Okay. Can you see the full tree? Can you see the full tree? Yes or no? You cannot see the full tree. Okay. I'm sorry.
It sure looks
like yeah. On our end, it looks like it.
No. Okay. Yes, we can see it now.
Okay. So these images are painted by my mother, Michaela Emato Amato. They're in from Zazu Dreams, my book on the Anthropocene. So as a preteen, I was completely immersed in intersectionality, and I was canvassing for the anti-war organization Sane Free's peace action. And at the same time working with El Salvador's FMLN, the National Liberation Movement, collaborating with them. And then I was working in relation to US involvement in El Salvador, the divestment campaign, which both Carl and Paloma mentioned. And here's an image, which I hope you can see. Can you see Winnie and Nelson Mandela? No, Winnie and Nelson, okay, they're in there. This is, we both, thank you. Thanks for responding. So this is again from Zazu Dreams, but the divestment work, sorry, the divestment work, we're having our own intergenerational communication going on over here. The divestment work was, for example, building a shanty town at UC Boulder. I was maybe 18 then, 17, and we lived in it until the divestment took place. And then soon after, sorry about that, moving. This is, I'll stay here. The kind of work I was doing with collaborating, for example, with the Inuit and Cree activists who were trying to fight Hydro-Quebec, the hydroelectric company, from damming James Bay, the second phase of James Bay, and that electricity would have gone to New York, New Hampshire, and Vermont. And that was one of our successes through an intensive awareness campaign. So it was, again, this is all simultaneous, the same bunch of years. I began the first university recycling program that Governor Cuomo at the time, way back in '91, used as a prototype for New York State. So these kinds of crossing over with collaborating with activists from other regions that had to do with what people would have been taking for granted, like turning on the light switch, but having that electricity come from a dam up north with devastating consequences to the people and the wildlife in that region. To, for example, the recycling program, that was '91, where that was all very new. And sorry, the switching back and forth.
And so this was all a little early in your adulthood, before you're even 22 years old. And then your work also started focusing a lot on environmental racism.
Right, so this is the understanding of what environmental racism was in relation to our body's vulnerability in general. I'll begin to show some of my images. I began to explore with my images. This is actually new work from a couple of months ago, or about a month ago, but using the vulnerability of my body as the subject matter in relation to the devastation or the collapse of scenes around me, of environmental spaces around me. And I'll just show a couple of images here. So here in relation to mask compliance, and much of my work is about petroleum, pharmaceutical addicted cyberculture. And what does it mean to be literally engulfed in these assumptions, this habituated obedience, that which we take for granted. And by highlighting how we, by highlighting the invisibility, like the invisibility of whiteness, or the invisibility of electricity, by highlighting these hegemonies, how do we then collectively and individually and then collectively and simultaneously back and forth take action? So that's, and this is also just within the month ago. This is an older image, but again, referring to masks. Again, an image from some time ago. And these are all analog images. This is from eco-village community, permaculture community in Eugene, Oregon. And this is in Oakland, California, where my son gave birth.
And I'm not sure how many people know, but at the beginning, Paloma was mentioning that we are visiting the West Coast in our biodiesel converted school bus. And we actually live in a school bus. It's our tiny home, which was made by the three of us with the help of also Georgia and Madison, my daughters. Only with repurposed materials that we found locally in the Detroit area at the time. And so with that, with kind of keeping in mind what we are living in, what we travel in, how are these integrated examples of decolonizing our power structures through both individual and community action?
So one realm that has become clear to me is this idea of finding allies in unexpected places. So the example of our home is one of many in which my daily life represents what it is that I'm talking about all the time and performing with our climate justice performances as an example. But sometimes because we're on such an edge, the edge that Paloma mentioned, the language around social movement and change becomes threatening, or it's intractable in a way, as if you make a change, but you're not doing it in the right way, or you're not doing your best, or you're still participating in cultural appropriation, or you're still participating in fossil fuel addiction. Even if you think, for example, because you're using quote unquote renewables, that somehow you're giving yourself and your world a shift, when in fact we know that there really is no such thing as renewable energy at this point because of the dependency of the minerals in the solar cells, because of lithium batteries. For example, our battery, we have a used electric car, at least it's a used battery. So we're always looking for ways to address what does feel intractable through used solar panels, for example. But in this process, because these issues are so both enmeshed, interconnected, and so raw, the word self-righteous comes up. For example, even when I was working in, so this is, I'm sharing my struggles now with you, and I'd love your reflections. When I was doing reproductive justice work, the words sanctimony, like sanctimonious, but women who are focusing on breastfeeding or on natural childbirth, we were often labeled sanctimommies, and I would always fold in. I don't use the word privilege and equality lightly at all, and we can explore that. But I always fold in, how do we address the invisibility? So for example, I didn't have any ultrasounds. I was 40 years old. I didn't have any ultrasounds when I was pregnant. That led, as far as I'm concerned, to a certain kind of health of my newborn. So looking at whole pictures, trying to weave together the fragments to understand that this is one of an infinite kinds of models that I'm sharing with you. Living in a school bus, I certainly don't expect anyone to let go of their home and move into a converted school bus. But the idea of peeling away the word apocalypse, I think we're confusing apocalypse and Armageddon these days with COVID-19. Apocalypse is a revelation. How do we actually embrace this revelation that we're in now and use that visibility to individually, absolutely individually, in relation to community, in relation to infrastructure, make changes? So when I speak about allies in unexpected places, that's where I'm finding extraordinary vitality and fertility, because a lot of my cohorts respond to me with terms, for example, like sanctimonious or self-righteousness. And so I'd love to have this dialogue, because it's a mess, and that mess is where we can jump into. That's really the commitment. And so here are just
Thank you, Cara.
A couple of more images. Are we at the end of time?
Yes, and just if you want to sort of move through this, we want to invite community dialogue and questions into the chat. And if you want to complete the slides that you'd like to share, and we'll begin listening to some of you. You can raise your hand, the raise hand function at the bottom of participants. If you go to participants at the bottom of your screen, there's a little indicator for raise hand, and we'll be looking at people who have their hands raised and begin there with questions. But
so, and I'll just finish up. So these are two of my books that are available. They're both in relation to social ecology and green colonialism and greenwashing. Again, really highlighting so much of what we take for granted in order to then make other possibilities available. And so I'm not going to say choices, but possibilities available for collective action. So Viscous Expectations is more of a critical philosophy text, looking at the vulnerability of the body as a strategy for social justice. And Zazu Dreams is a dialogue between the sciences and the humanities. Again, a cross-cultural examination of the relationship between humanitarian abuses and ecological collapse. But how can we learn cross-culturally and through historical examples of models of symbiosis and looking at what is considered intractable and actually using that to propel us to make collective, collaborative, coalitional change.
Thank you, Cara. So I'm looking for specific hands that are up. I see both Nicole Sumner and Shams, dear friend and colleague here in Berkeley. Welcome. And I'd like to unmute and ask Shams to speak his question into the space. Thank you, Shams.
Hello.
Hello.
It's good to see you.
And
Yes.
Brandon, if you want to highlight Shams so we can see him, that would be great.
Well, I don't need to be highlighted as long as my voice is heard.
We hear you.
Cara, you represent a huge challenge to me, and I can understand some of the feedback and even pushback, not that I feel that way, that part of it, but you're actualizing at a micro level a compliance with your values and what you know to be so, at a level that I can't imagine actualizing. I don't feel I have the time, the energy, the resources, the communal support to do that. I live very simply by American standards. I'm low down in my footprint. Still, what I'm saying is that I understand how your example is provocative and stimulating to other people.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. The pushback, the struggle is, I'm on the verge of tears right now. I certainly appreciate your responses. And I look forward to meeting in person and having a conversation too.
And we also have a hand up from Nicole Sumner, I think it is. Nicole, please unmute and join us with your question. Thank you.
Unmute, unmask. Sorry about that. I'm outside Dolores Park, San Francisco. Hi, Cara.
Hello,
Cara and I, just a little background, we collaborated. I did vocal improv with a lot of her photographs, and I used a lot of humor because I was uncomfortable myself with images that looked like a monk's head being pressed into the ground, or an African American's. You know, there's one actual image that was in a couple of shows where there was a pressure with a bar on the back of the neck, which is reminiscent, of course, of George Floyd. Sorry, it's noisy here, but so I'm uncomfortable more now with some of your images and even some of your new ones because of the traumatizing impact. And I think we have just too many images of, especially BIPOC bodies being traumatized in public and just being shown for the benefit of people to learn or to, just news. And so I just emailed you recently, but we didn't have enough conversation for me to really get how you justify using bodies that with an oven that looks like a World War II Holocaust
Absolutely.
oven with your body, and how you justify that. I feel like we don't have enough images to play against all those violent images in our culture.
Yeah.
Thank you, Nicole.
I'm really happy that you made that association with the oven and the Holocaust. So thank you for that perception. We are beyond inundated, and for me as a visual artist and as someone who must be involved in a corporeal realm, there is no other language that I can use besides, I think it's very different than what we're talking about advertising, where there is a product involved that is underneath the extraordinary violence that is being insinuated. This goes back to the very first part of my presentation in terms of the public and the private and relationality, that the interconnectedness of our vulnerabilities, I feel more than anything, is what will carry us to a different kind of realm of being, where that intimacy, where we have to feel some kind of collective intimacy. That doesn't mean that we're merging into amorphous, colorblind, class blind nonsense, but where our own sense of being stripped of internal horrors or ancestral horrors is somehow evoked through the particular image. So I'm not showing an example of police brutality. That is not what I'm doing. I'm using sensuous materials, raw bodies, and what needs to happen in this process of viewing the image is a separation between our own imaginations projecting themselves on the image, and then I'll say contaminating the image or informing the image or how we're reading the image, and the relationships within the image, and playing with the possibility that what we see is not necessarily, or what we are telling ourselves that we see is not necessarily what is there. So it's
just your connection so much to people. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I think it's affecting a lot. I guess that you could use text, like the piece called 3 Grays for Freddie. 3 Grays for Freddie, being Freddie Gray, has text to support it. So just a bystander, a layperson coming upon your photographs has that support of text. So I know you make a choice to not put text, but I think it's making a risky choice. Well, a choice that will take longer and it expects people to be more intellectual about it.
Or the opposite. Or they could have a heart response, or a nauseated response, a corporeal response, something coming out of their gut. And I do always have comment books, particularly because my work has been censored in so many different contexts. I've always had comment books, as you know, we performed the comment books, and public dialogue was always part of the exhibition spaces. So
those were old days. Now everything is in an instant, an Instagram and a tweet.
Well, so I don't do that. I don't know what that world is about. I mean, I wouldn't know how to navigate. I mean, my images are not on Instagram or tweeting, because that's not the language that I'm exploring. But I think there's just a collapse that we need to be careful of.
Oh my God.
Thank you.
So I want to give some others an opportunity to speak. Thank you, Nicole. So let's just take a moment to breathe. I saw Jane Ellen's hand, Jane Ellen Kovakovich, and I want to also say we have just a few more minutes. I'm going to ask Carl to summarize some of what we've discovered here today and some of what we're carrying forward. And then we'll have a closing inspiration from Desmond Tutu. Jane Ellen, your question, please.
It's actually a sense of what I'm hearing as you speak. And I feel like what's happening is that there's an intuitive side that is rising up in your language, and you're listening to it. I don't experience you as giving me a talk. I experience you as listening to a deeper source that is coming up, and you're listening to it and giving it, which is a deeper connection. So I just want to thank you for having that process and allowing us to hear it stream through, because it's like an undercurrent that's rising up. Your intellect, your experiences, all of it seem to be working together, and we don't know where that flow will go next. It's a beautiful process. So I just want to acknowledge That's what I'm hearing.
I very, very much appreciate your perception, your perspective. Thank you.
Thank you, Jane Ellen. I also want to acknowledge that Jane Ellen is one of the people who's been responding, first responder in the face of the fires, both working as an educator and a teacher, and also helping to evacuate animals in the face of the fires in Northern California here.
Wow, wow, thank you.
Jane Ellen, it's an honor that you're with us here tonight. I want to take a moment to hear any last summary comments that you'd like to make, Cara, and see if there's any others from our community who are wanting to lift up a question. And then Carl, we'd like to hear from you as we begin to close this evening. Any other questions from our community? And Cara, any closing comments that you'd like to make? Thank you.
I am delighted to be part of your world, Paloma, and for each of you this evening. I'm very grateful that each of you chose to participate in this peculiar mini adventure. I would love to continue conversations with those of you who are interested. I'm in the process of adapting Zazu Dreams to a screen production and to a stage production. Oh, thank you. And collaboration is at the core of all of my work, as Nicole knows. And if those of you have responses or reflections about this edge, about this precariousness between individual action and how we, the multiple roles that we play as activists, as mothers, as friends, as women, whatever category, how, if those of you have a sense of how you explore your own sense of courage and your own sense of interrelationship, and how that interrelationship feeds you, but also can leave you extraordinarily depleted. So again, it's this contradiction and ambiguity in which I inhabit and am struggling with, and I'd love to be in dialogue with people who are interested in furthering that kind of exploration together.
Thank you.
Thank you, Carl and Paloma.
I also want to thank Brandon for assisting and Richard Page this evening. And I'm going to ask you, Carl, to offer any closing remarks before we do our final sending forth from the words of Desmond Tutu. So go ahead, Carl. Any closing comments?
Well, it is a great privilege of me to try to make a few summary remarks about this zone of ambiguity that you have lifted up and given a name. And as surprisingly as it may be, that as we try to transform the work that we're doing by celebrating our understanding of renewable energy, to think back a few hundred years when the whole idea of renewable energy for a certain group of dominating people went to Africa and took other people under their exploitation to promote slavery, how they may have thought that what they were doing was renewable energy. and the ambiguity of that particular moment that was multiplied by 12 million people whose lives gave birth to people who built the American experience, and yet at the same time was invisible. In a sense, you've given us a language to begin an exploration of our experience for many generations of how we are going to transform our understanding of renewable energy as also a problematic area that we maybe take a few more years to understand that is a moment in our passage toward a realization of our full humanity as part of a population whose being was given to us at this moment of ambiguity that you have described. So thank you very much. Thank you for all of the people who have taken that part of their experiences, which had no names and had no location, to realize that at this particular moment that you've given us an opportunity to rethink what our experience has been and how we can make a contribution out of that ambiguous moment to a transformation that can be shared widely. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Carl. And we've spoken much about giving birth and artistry here tonight. And I wanted to make sure that we pause for a moment and honor Cara's mother, who is also here. And if you would be willing to say her name for us, Cara.
Michaela.
So the artist who provided the paintings that are in Zazu Dreams book.
Michaela Amato.
Thank you.
Michaela,
honor you, and thank you for giving birth to this extraordinary being who is being honored here tonight. And thank you also for the multiple generations and for the beings of the future, including our lovely and inspiring Zazu, who opened us this evening, who is the subject of the book.